Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a topical video. We've got John over here. I always got to bring him into these, but we decided to do a little bit of a discussion today. We were going to do it yesterday, but given that we had all the Lucha content and NXT, of course, to cover, we decided to give that content some room to breathe and move this to today. Smackdown going live, brand split, draft on July 11th. John, go.
You guys have been asking for it. We're more than happy to provide. Huge news. And it's so funny, Ashton, because I know in conversation, and then we made the formal announcement here, we're about to do away with SmackDown reviews, from our itinerary, because we just felt like, SmackDown isn't really productive. They're not really doing anything. And then it's almost like the wrestling universe left, and it's like, oh, you wanted to do something, do you? Oh, well, I'll do that and then some, because we're also getting the return of one of my favorite times as a kid, the WWE draft. And I think you've even told me, both in conversation and in recording, you've loved the draft as well as a kid, like growing up, Ashton.
Yeah, I feel like there was a time a few years ago that we even managed to do like a mock draft video with, it might have even been with the Four Horsemen when it was me, you, Alex, and Preston all doing our thing together. But I don't know if we did that or if that was just a plan that we wanted to do that we never went through with or what. But I feel like I remember vaguely having a plan to do something like that.
Well, I think we had a discussion, but it never materialized because I really don't remember that in our archives. And
Yeah.
I mean, granted, my memory isn't the best, but I think a video that substantive
Yeah.
I would have remembered because we did quite a few substantive projects like 100 Greatest Wrestlers and
Yeah.
things like that.
And the
I
other
think
one
it,
that I
yeah.
remember was when we all tried to project 5 people that would be released in spring cleaning that year.
Yeah. And see, I think a draft like was, on the table, but I don't think it ever materialized, which is a shame because again, like I love the draft, you love the draft, and it's an exciting time,
Well, the good
so
news is we're doing a mock draft video this year, people. John and I are going to get up here on July the 8th. It's a Friday. Maybe the 7th. I don't know. Depends on how it works out schedule wise. The 7th or the 8th, either way. And we're going to be doing two separate mock drafts. The first one is going to be more fun, more kind of fantasy based. John and I are each going to be playing the role of general manager of our own specific brands. We're going to have the WWE and NXT rosters laid out for us. And we're also going to have sort of the free reign to pick non contracted freelance wrestling talents off of the indie scene. And our goal is to fill up a roster. What would you say is a good number, John? Like 30, 40?
30 sounds good to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to try and fill out a 30-man roster each. That's going to be fun. But then on that same video, we're also going to be doing a little bit more of a reality-based discussion on who we actually think is going to end up on each brand, Raw and SmackDown. But for this video, we're going to be focusing much more on the potential plans, what is going to be changing with the move from SmackDown on Thursdays to Tuesdays, and also from taped to live. And we might even be having a little bit of a preview talking about who's going to be on each brand. Right, John?
Absolutely. Ashton, would you mind if I, began the discussion and started the
Go
moment?
for it.
Because
Go for
I,
it.
I have something I'd like to field in your direction, which I've heard
Okay.
murmured about a little bit. Let's talk about, and I say this, jokingly, of course, but let's talk about the redheaded stepchild in this whole thing. How does NXT fit into this? How do you think
I think
NXT
that
is
there are
going
going
to
to be a
change?
lot more call ups. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that they're going to call up, 20 people all within a month of each other, but I do think the call ups are going to happen more frequently and a lot quicker than maybe they had been planning because, and honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if a good majority of said call ups were to SmackDown.
And I was going to say the same thing. I'm so glad you said that. You and I are completely on the same wavelength as far as that's concerned.
And you know
I
what,
could
dude? I don't want to cut you off. I just wanted to say also, I think that this also is probably going to lead to the WWE signing a lot more international talent
and I completely agree
and
again.
just kind of shoving them into that NXT system to compete with everyone that's already there.
Why I'm excited for the draft, particularly now. If it was a few years ago, I probably would have had my reservations. I mean, I always love it, right? But I'm like, is it really ideal? There is so much talent coming in and such a saturation. I think a reallocation of said talent was definitely in order. And I completely agree with you. I think SmackDown is getting ready to bulk the hell up because I see a lot of NXT talents going there. I don't know how NXT, and see, here's what kind of concerns me, and I'll ask you if you think this is a concern. I'm I'm curious how they're going to handle like the rate of call-ups to the rate of like, actual signings, for example. Like, is there going to be a healthy ratio of that for all the people called up? We have this many people coming in. Because, I mean, the NXT brand, because of this, do you see any potential negative consequences for the NXT brand long-term because of this?
Well, you say negative. I'm not going to necessarily say whether it's going to be negative or positive, but what I will say is I would be willing to bet that NXT is about to experience a at least a like 6 month to a year long period of extreme volatility.
And I would agree. Yeah, this changes everything to me. I mean, I know it's a blanket statement, maybe even a bit of hyperbole, but I mean, that's honestly what I believe. I think this is a major shakeup for the WWE and one that comes at the most exciting possible time, again, because you look at the saturation of talent. I mean, you've already said that you don't see Nakamura in NXT very long. Well, I mean, now the question becomes like, where does he go? Where do talents like that go? Talents like Austin Aries, and I'm not going to get specific there because, we may do a little bit of that at the end and we have our mock draft video. But this is where questions like that become especially pertinent. It's no longer fantasy booking, but it's reality that we're dealing with. And yeah, I think NXT is a big piece of the puzzle here.
Yeah. I think that NXT is going to get raided, and NXT is going to do a raid on a lot of promotions worldwide as well.
All right. Well, I mean, do you have anything else you want to say about NXT? Because I had another point of discussion I wanted to field your way. You think we can comfortably move on?
Let's see. I think that, yeah, well, obviously, I do think that a lot of. Oh, you know what? There are a lot of other points that I do want to talk about, but none of them have to do with NXT. So let's move on.
Okay, another thing I wanted to field to you, because I know this is going to be the more interesting point for our listeners, because you and I have started to have this conversation just personally between the two of us. The WWE World Heavyweight Championship.
Yeah.
And now SmackDown getting bulked up.
They're splitting it.
Let me just okay, so you think they're splitting it, first of all. You answered that straight away.
I hate it. I hate it. I think it's stupid, but every single sign points to 2 world titles.
Now, let me just give my thoughts. I'm going to try and make them brief, and then I want to hear just your full expounded thoughts. I would love, particularly because WWE really wants to market Roman Reigns, if because he has the WWE World Heavyweight Championship, like any other champion, he goes on both shows, and if we do get, and I guess that's another question too that I'll ask you here in a second, if we would hypothetically, and I want to stress hypothetically, get unique pay-per-views to Raw and SmackDown, I'd like to see him defend the belt on both shows. You get a SmackDown contender and a Raw contender, each respective month.
The thing is, though, like that doesn't even matter because there's going to be a second there's going to be a Raw world champion and a SmackDown world champion. They're not going to float around the shows, not at first at least. Maybe like eventually, if they decide that the ratings aren't what they expected them to be and they want to change things up, they might do a floating world champion. But the plan right now, and this is not just me speculating, this is Dave Meltzer reporting. The plan right now, set in stone, is 2 world champions, one on each show.
Do you think...
I've even heard more specifically that it's going to be Roman representing Raw and Cena on SmackDown.
Oh, dear God. Cena actually is less foul to me than Roman still carrying around that belt. And I know, like, you know what, I don't want to get ahead of myself, so maybe that'll come up more organically later in the video. I was getting ready to say something, but... You have the 2 world titles. I know you hate it, and again, I want to give you your reasons why here in a second. Me, I don't like it either. I guess I'll be cool with it after a while. It just, like, I think we all, or at least I should say that I saw this coming to a degree, because with all the talents coming in and with how picky I'm sure people are backstage about, well, who's going to be the next world champion, like, not everybody would get their fair shot. I would be more okay with this if I knew that the SmackDown world title wouldn't get completely bitched out, and I do kind of have fears about that. If Cena's holding it, he'll probably put in the work, he'll be a workhorse, he'll have, like, these great title defenses, but it's gotta mean something, because, like, we even said in our NXT discussion, if there's 2 world titles, and we're talking specifically about Shinsuke is such a talent, he deserves the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. And I have a feeling we're going to be expressing that sentiment about a lot of guys that may be SmackDown bound. And I think it would just take the sting out of it a little bit if that SmackDown Championship was at least comparably worthwhile, if not even more so, if they could pull that miracle out of the hat. But now, I want to concede the floor to you. Why exactly, full thoughts, do you hate it?
I just hate it because we've seen it before. We've seen what happens when Raw gets a champion and SmackDown gets a champion, and every time whoever is representing SmackDown is basically a mid-carder. You can look at the long list. If you would break down every world champion in WWE history, You can look at everybody that has won the WWE Championship and everybody that has won the World Championship. And if they're on the World Championship list, but not on the WWE Championship list, chances are that WWE did not see them as a star. They didn't get portrayed as a star. They were basically second rate.
And I have to agree. And I think a lot of your, frustration and your
Now, that's not to
disappointment
say
with
it
this.
can't be entertaining, because
Right.
let's be real. I think that Mark Henry's world title run on SmackDown in late 2011 was one of the most entertaining pieces of WWE television over the last decade. That was brilliant. But
Yeah.
still, every time we talk about how great would it be if Mark Henry got one last run as the WWE World Champ, it never even comes into reality. It never even becomes something that we really give much thought to beyond just, oh yeah, that would be a nice thing to happen, but it's not going to.
Right. I see what you're saying.
Like,
Yeah.
and the thing is, it's not like it's a situation where he doesn't have a certain look that Vince likes, or he doesn't have the credibility, or he can't talk or anything. Like, he's everything you want in a world champion, especially a heel world champion. The thing is, Vince just doesn't see him as that kind of guy. And apparently when he was on SmackDown, whoever was writing it at the time did want him to be that guy, and they made him that guy, and he was great in it, but Vince doesn't see it that way. And that is where we kind of come around to the biggest bad news of all. This is going to end up giving Vince McMahon more reason to care about SmackDown. He's going to be much more hands-on with it.
That is true. That is very true. And you gotta wonder, what that means. I mean, to me, it's just funny that this news, again, I used a term earlier, it's seismic, because I feel like it touches everything. Oddly enough, June 19th is Money in the Bank. Could this be the last year we have one Money in the Bank ladder match, and now we go back to two starting next year? Or are they going to keep it as one, but then the guy holding the briefcase can decide which champion he cashes in on? How are they going to handle that?
I think that this year, Money in the Bank is going to be a quick one and done thing. I think that it's going to be Dean Ambrose, and I think he's going to cash in at SummerSlam, and maybe even after SummerSlam is when we're going to get the title split, so that we don't even have to worry about that this year. And then next year we'll go back to having two ladder matches.
And see, I'm inclined to agree with you. I mean, the only difference is, I've been picking Kevin Owens from the get-go to win Money in the Bank. I'm sticking with it.
But do you at least agree that whoever it ends up winning the Money in the Bank is going to cash in relatively quickly, within a few months?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It won't take long at all. Given this news, absolutely. I really don't see it taking long at all. And, and that's the thing. Regardless of who wins, that's a mood issue. The big issue is, and see, that's the thing, too. On one hand, I want to be happy about the prospect about guys like Kevin Owens, Cesaro, Dean Ambrose getting in a world title picture, but it's not the world title picture. And that's where I kind of sigh, almost resigning myself to this whole thing. Because I mentioned earlier, I was about to mention a conversation I had on TWitWoW. Oliver Conner, shout out to him, said that his fear was KO, if he won the Money in the Bank, would cash in unsuccessfully. Like, Reigns would kick out of a pop-up powerbomb.
Oh, I'm fully expecting whoever wins Money in the Bank this year to be unsuccessful with their cash-in, because the plan right now is Roman keeps the title until Mania and then probably drops it to Cena, if I had to guess.
Right. But see, that's another thing, though, with this brand split. Maybe they would hold on to the briefcase long enough for the second title to be introduced, and it's, okay, now because it's only one briefcase, you get your choice. And maybe that's the workaround. But
yeah, I mean, they could even use that to do, and I used to love when they did this, too, like a brand hop.
Right, exactly.
Because I used to love it when they would do like a trade. Like, oh, I'm going to trade you these three people for The Undertaker, I believe was one thing that they did.
Right.
That kind of thing. Like, I love that kind of stuff. I think that's interesting. And if they want to use the Money in the Bank to say that this Raw guy is going to be on SmackDown from now on because he just won the SmackDown Championship, well, that's cool.
Yeah, it's certainly cool. I just think, again, just bringing it full circle with that thread that I've been mentioning, I know Andrew Wilshire was like, oh, well, Kevin Owens will cash in. I believe he even said, like, the SmackDown champion, or when they get a second title, so you don't need to worry about that. And I said, Andrew, you're not even wrong. It's not that I have a problem with you personally saying that. It's just I feel like KO's work as of late he deserves to be the champion. Like we talked about Nakamura being deserving to be the champion. And that's really where my frustration is, a lot like yours earlier that you expressed. You're going to see these guys who are workhorses or maybe have their characters down to a science and just own a microphone not get to stand in that particular spotlight. It's always going to be, oh, well, we'll just give you the SmackDown title, which I personally feel like is going to be very quickly gain a reputation post Cena if he does get the first reign as a workhorse title. I could see guys like, Ambrose, Cesaro, Owens, like all those big indie guys that, put in the work, either character, in-ring, whatever, holding that championship. And that's great and all, but it's really got to mean something for me to really get behind it. Like, if we get even one reign like a Jack Swagger, I'm immediately deflated. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I completely get what you mean. And that's a big reason why I'm not a big fan of splitting the title again. We literally just unified the titles in, I believe, December of 2013.
Right.
And now all of a sudden it's not even 3 years later and you're going to split the title again. I just don't like that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I didn't have a problem with two titles when we had it, but now that we have one title, I don't want to go back to having two titles.
And see again, like this is what I mean. I completely agree with you. First and foremost,
I think that the ideal scenario would be to have whoever is your world champion and whoever is your women's champion can go on either show. And then you have the Intercontinental title on SmackDown and the U.S. title on Raw. And the tag team champs can go on either show as well.
Right.
That's like the winning one of those titles, one of those main titles, whether you're tag team, a female, or a singles male. If you win the biggest title in your division, you earn the right to bounce between each show.
Right. And it's funny because Roman Reigns is currently the WWE World Heavyweight Champion, and I know a lot of people would probably like to see less of him given their hatred of the character and everything, but me, given this brand split, I'm the exact opposite. I'm like, well, no, now this is the time to feature him more than ever, because I would love to see, like, say, just again, hypothetically, because you and I are just spitballing here, like, say it's the fall, September, we have Raw, I only know old pay-per-view names as a kid, we have Raw Unforgiven, Reigns defends it against Raw's number one contender, and then the next month, October,
I'm going to just tell you
No
right
Mercy.
now, I do not think that we're going to have brand-specific pay-per-views. I think every show is going to have representatives from both brands on it.
Yeah, and like I don't mind that, but I got to be honest, the little kid in me would love brand-specific pay-per-views again.
See, and the reason that I don't think that's going to happen is because they're not going to try and play it off like the way they did with Heyman, where Heyman legitimately did write SmackDown, and it was kind of like he was the captain of that team, and he drafted the players, he came up with the game plan, he completely controlled SmackDown for a while, and I don't think that they're going to do that at all, because even if they do try and pass it off as like, oh, well, Shane McMahon, you control SmackDown, Shane's not actually going to be writing SmackDown, Shane's not actually going to be the one controlling who goes to his squad, because they're going to be it's not a full-blown draft, it's a draft lottery.
Let's use what you just said about, like, controlling SmackDown. There are two things I want to talk about with SmackDown specifically. Let's start with the first. Let's use what you said as a jumping off point. We know that Shane and Stephanie seem to be controlling Raw. I've been hearing rumors that Daniel Bryan could be the SmackDown GM. What do you think about that?
I don't buy it for a second. No way. It's going to be one of the McMahons. It's either going to be Shane or Steph. I'm guessing it's going to be Shane.
So you feel like all the tension they've tried to build up between Shane and Stephanie is just going to be deflated because now they're just going to resolve it with, okay, Shane, if you really want to go out and prove yourself, you can run SmackDown.
No, I think it's going to be Vince coming in and saying, God damn it, I wanted you guys to be at each other's throats. Well, now you can't compete or you can't cooperate, so I'm going to make you compete. And that's going to be what it is. He's going to put Shane on SmackDown, and he's going to say, beat Stephanie, or if you can, beat Stephanie with the ratings.
Okay, well, I mean, given like, how do you feel about that? Are you just kind of resigned to it, like, man, whatever, or would you like a real shakeup and get a new SmackDown GM?
No, I don't actually care, because it's not going to change anything. Like, I don't care who the face of the general manager is. Like, I don't care what face you put in front of me and tell me this is your general manager, because at the end of the day, it all comes back to Vince's writing. Like, he's the only person that matters in this. They're not going to do like what they did in the original brand split back in, I guess, 03-ish, somewhere around there, where they legitimately gave Paul Heyman creative control over SmackDown, and they basically made it his show for however long he had it. It was only like a few months from what I remember. But they're not going to do that now. It's not going to be any kind of creative control change. The only thing that's changing is the person who's being presented on television as being in control of SmackDown. That's not legit, though.
So it's your same kind of frustration and resignation with the whole Shane and Stephanie deal to begin with,
Yeah,
because you really
exactly.
stress like the internal workings aren't changing. This is just like a cosmetic thing at best. Why should I care? Follow-up question, and again, this is another thing I want to talk about SmackDown specific. Do you think that this whole shakeup is going to grow interest in SmackDown? Because you figure with SmackDown, right? They're getting off Sci-Fi. They're now a property of the USA Network. USA, it has their finger on the pulse of WWE content. They have Raw and they have SmackDown now. It's going live. That's another thing, too. What do you think this is going to do for SmackDown's viewership? Do you think an increase in viewership we'll see? I know we just got done talking about writing, but do you feel like SmackDown will come off maybe as refreshed and get a kick in the ass? Like, what do you see for the brand itself with everything going on?
I don't know. I think at the end of the day, it depends on what Vince wants to do. Because if Vince wants to try and make SmackDown feel different, he knows how to do that. If Vince thinks that, he just wants to make SmackDown feel more like Raw so that we have 2 A shows, he can do that. If he wants SmackDown to be more of a B show, he can do that. It depends on Vince. That's what it all comes down to. And I'll also say, I think SmackDown, and I've loved this idea for a long time, and I would really love for them to go through with this, and maybe this is a sign that they're thinking about doing it. I think SmackDown needs to become a bridge between NXT and Raw.
So, like, just to contextualize what you're saying, when you say bridge, you say NXT star goes to SmackDown, really hones their skills, and then they brand hop to Raw and really try and prove themselves, or what?
Well, yeah, I think that basically they need to treat SmackDown. It's like a tier system. If somebody does really well in NXT, they get really over, they get really popular, they're really good in the ring, they put on good matches, they get really well received matches, that kind of stuff. Bring them up to SmackDown. See if they can get that same kind of response on SmackDown. If they do really well on SmackDown and they kind of light the brand on fire the same way that they might have done in NXT, bring them up to Raw, see how they do there. Or the opposite, like if somebody is on Raw and they're really floundering and they're doing everything they can, but the crowd isn't responding, send them down to SmackDown. You know what I mean? Like treat it as, the tiers: your A show, your B show, your C show. People on NXT that do well go up to SmackDown. People on SmackDown that do well go up to Raw. People on Raw that don't do well go down to SmackDown. People on SmackDown that don't do well go down to NXT. Basically you can have like territories within your own company.
So you really want like a rigid functioning hierarchy, more or less,
Yeah, I mean,
of brands.
obviously it's not going to be completely rigid, but I want for the 80% of the time, I want that to be the case. Yes.
Right. Okay. I'm glad that we could conceive of, where your head is at with this whole thing. I find that to be a very attractive idea, for the record.
Like
I just think,
and that does kind of come back to the Mark Henry thing, because that was the last draft ever. And Mark Henry was one of the draft picks that went from Raw to SmackDown, and people were dreading it. People hated it, including me. I thought it was insanely stupid. I hated the idea that Mark Henry was getting drafted to SmackDown because I saw it as a waste of a draft pick. Why would you bother using a draft pick on this old guy that doesn't do anything anymore? He's so boring in the ring. And he cut an awesome promo talking about how he's in the best shape of his life on the day of the draft. It was a web exclusive, I believe.
I remember that.
He ended up having one of the best runs of anyone in the last decade. It was awesome. I want that kind of thing to become the new norm. I want somebody who everyone is overlooking to get drafted from one show to the other, be given a breath of fresh air, given an opportunity to prove themselves as an asset and to knock that ball out of the park.
It's just going to be, I mean, again, agree with you, no disagreements here. I just think my worry is on a talent level. I worry about guys that may really be gaining momentum someplace. And I'm talking like in the future, if we do more drafts in the future, I'm thinking long term. They build up momentum and then just gets wiped away and you have to go back. I mean, the example, and isn't this freaking obvious, that comes to my mind when John Morrison got drafted to Raw. When he got drafted to Raw, he was leaving SmackDown where he was really building something. He had the fanfare, he had the momentum. I honestly thought like he was on the cusp of the world title with his performances. He goes on Raw. It took him forever to rebuild. He didn't start rebuilding until late, I believe, 2010 when he had that feud with Sheamus. And then that's when he started climbing up. I would hate to see guys who would put in so much work be like, oh, just go here and do that, and it gets wiped away clean. But then again, like you said, kind of bouncing off the hierarchy idea, it really would be testing. Like, wow, they're doing really great in this environment. Let's see if it translates well in a different environment. And, that's cool because, Raw is the bigger show, so I guess it would mean more money, more opportunities, whatever. I do worry about some guys if they'd be able to make that transition, and if they can't, like, how do you really fix that? I feel like it would just be one big kind of rehabilitation for a character as far as I'm concerned. But, that's something to consider, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what could potentially make this special is if the WWE treats, Raw, SmackDown, and NXT as sort of separate territories. Not just like, oh, we have different rosters, but straight up make it seem like people that watch Raw don't necessarily watch SmackDown or vice versa. I mean, you already pretty much have it set up so that people that watch Raw don't necessarily have to watch NXT or vice versa. So why can't you do that same thing with Raw and SmackDown, and then SmackDown and NXT, and Raw and NXT? So that if somebody does something on SmackDown that is just a complete and colossal failure, just say, here's a perfect example, Kazarni. Say Kazarni showed up on, I don't even remember, was he on Raw or SmackDown back in the day?
He was SmackDown.
Say he shows up on SmackDown, he has his match with MVP, he doesn't hear a single freaking crowd reaction because no one cares about him. It's a disaster. Rather than releasing him, send him down to NXT. Let him refine his gimmick. Let's see what he can do. Or if he was just a victim of circumstance,
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think that is definitely another attractive aspect of the hierarchy that you'd want in place. It's that just because somebody bombs in a particular endeavor, like say a debut or whatever, to your point with Kazarni, it's not like, okay, we have to cut our losses now. This isn't working.
I want to see NXT become the home of Tyson Kidds and Emmas who fail on the main roster and then come back down and find themselves.
Yeah, and that's what I'm really hoping for. Look, I think my views can be summed up very simply. I want to care. Like, I want to be really excited about Tuesday nights now, because that's another thing we have to remember, too. It's going to be switching over to Tuesdays when they go live.
Yeah, I think the big soundbite that I immediately thought of as soon as I saw this news, SmackDown is about to get a whole lot more interesting, but Raw is about to get a whole lot more repetitive.
Yeah, because Raw, that's the kicker, too. Raw's still 3 hours.
Yep.
And
you're losing 40% of your roster at least.
And how are you going to bulk it up again with NXT? Like, could we finally be expecting that Balor debut and that Nakamura debut and all that stuff?
Joe, and I mean, freaking Meltzer and Alvarez were even joking, like, well, now maybe instead of Heath Slater jobbing to Dolph Ziggler, it'll be Elias Sampson jobbing to Dolph Ziggler.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is, again, and I use the phrase like the little kid in me, and it's true. Like, this news brings me back to the Ruthless Aggression era, and I want to be excited about the draft and the brand split, and I am. I really am. It's just, I want to care long term. I want to be able to come on here with my cohort and commentary here before we start recording and be like, oh man, I can't wait for SmackDown this Tuesday because insert reason here. And I think...
Well, and I'm expecting SmackDown to be more interesting than Raw, at least for the first few weeks, if not few months.
Right.
Just because, like, there's this new dynamic. We've got this roster. We've got new things going on. We're live for the first time in years. Has SmackDown ever been a live show, or has it been taped for its entire life?
I feel like it's been taped for its entire life. The only time it's ever gone live is with those specials.
Yeah. But now, like, it is live. It is... And I think the biggest positive to come out of this is that the WWE isn't going to be able to can crowd reactions on SmackDown anymore.
That's true. And here is where my optimism, and in fact, let me be specific, my cautious optimism about this whole thing comes in. Because SmackDown's going live now, because it's on the USA Network and it's become a property now of the USA Network, I do think Vince, at least for the first little bit, to your point, is going to give a shit. Because I feel like he is going to want to make it seem like to the USA executives, like, this was a positive move, everybody's making more money, this and that. I'd like it to be a long-term mindset, but I do think there will be a care and a compassion and an investment in how this show's developed. What that means specifically, I couldn't tell you, but I do think it is going to be good at first, because you don't make a shift this seismic and then just be like, okay, well, it's done. No, you're gonna have to show results to me. It's gonna be an imperative that you show results.
Well, and that's another big thing is there is still the chance that this could fail. There is still the chance that this could just blow up in Vince's face. Ratings could drop even further, which, I mean, really, if ratings drop, I would say like 15 to 20% more than they already have, you're at the point now that 3 hours is detrimental.
Yeah. Because so far they're happy with it because it's just extra money coming in with that third hour. But with the viewership drop-offs, and here's my thing too, and here's my only concern, if I'm being honest, about SmackDown being live, particularly on Tuesdays, which makes sense because they've always taped on Tuesdays. You're talking about 5 hours straight. You go from 3-hour Raws to 2-hour SmackDowns just in succession a week right there. And then Wednesday's NXT, that continues. That's 6 hours, just all in the same week. Yeah. Just those 3 days. Like, and we've talked about this before, even before the brand split and all this, but I think, again, it's a conversation that once was old, is new again and becomes more pertinent. This oversaturation problem that WWE has. Now, I think in terms of talent, they're also kind of having, because everybody's coming in, but I think they're going to solve that problem now because of this draft and because of the brand split. They'll be able to do proper allocations. But in terms of overall content, I still think there's a problem there. And yet, just those 3 days, 3 hours Monday, 2 hours Tuesday, 1 hour Wednesday, just crazy, absolutely crazy to think about. And I don't know if there's going to be a burnout. And if there is a burnout, again, returning to your central point, you're probably going to see a ratings drop off.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at here. I did the math 8 days ago on Reddit, and I just wanted to kind of bring the numbers up here. The average rating for Raw over the course of the final 3 months worth of 2-hour episodes was 3.12. Okay.
Right.
The average rating for the most recent 3 months worth of Raw, which have all been 3-hour episodes, is 2.51, or if you don't count the post WrestleMania Raw because of the fact that it's kind of that special big deal feel, it would still be 2.49. Now that sounds bad, but in order for the 3-hour Raw to be making the WWE less money than what the 2-hour Raws were making, it would have to be as low as 2.08. So we're still at a point where 3 hours is making the WWE quite a bit more money than 2 hours were. Because at 2.49 over 3 hours, if you would, compare that to what it would have been if it was 2 hours, that would be as if a 2-hour Raw would get a rating of 3.74. That's insanely.
Right.
So I don't think that the WWE has any plans to go back down to 2 hours. But again, like I said, and I even underestimated, the ratings would need to drop by another basically 25% in order for the 3 hours to be detrimental.
Right.
And I don't see that happening anytime soon. I mean, even just from going from 3 hours to 2 hours, the rating has only dropped by like 20-ish%. So it's still, it would need to drop from going from the 2 hours down to 3 hours or up to 3 hours. The ratings would need to drop by a third. So 33 and a third%, right?
So you've really just crunched the numbers here. And what I think I want to ask you as kind of my concluding question, maybe there are things you want to bring up and you're more at liberty to do so, of course. Do you feel like, first of all, how optimistic do you feel and how excited do you feel for this change occurring? And long term, I mean, do you think it'll be successful? Because I'm really starting to become concerned again when I think about the oversaturation problem. But again, I'm cautiously optimistic. Where are you with all this news, as a fan? And, you and I always pick this stuff apart. Like, where are you at right now?
I'm sit and wait, man. I don't have an opinion. I'm not trying to say that it's a good decision or a bad decision until the numbers come in, because if I personally, knowing just that SmackDown is going live, that's enough to get me interested enough to watching it again. And not only that, but you and I are going to start reviewing it again when that happens.
Right.
Now, I don't know when SmackDown is going live. I've heard July, which I'm guessing probably means that the first live episode will be July 12th, the day after the draft.
I heard either the 12th or even the 19th, actually. I guess
Right.
give it a week for it to breathe,
Right, I
and
get
then they
that.
go
Yeah,
in.
that would make sense. But the whole thing that I've got is it all depends on Vince. Vince, and this is even something that Alvarez and Meltzer were saying a lot in their Observer today and yesterday. Vince is very excited about this, and he has a lot of ideas. And when Vince has a lot of ideas, things change every second.
Exactly.
You
Exactly. Now,
just don't know. You just don't know if an idea that Vince comes out with is going to stick. But the one thing that Meltzer really was really sure about, that he was convinced of, that people were really kind of hammering at him, was that there are going to be two titles. That's like
yeah.
that's like basically set in stone at this point. There are going to be two titles. Vince is sure of that. That's the one thing that we're pretty sure he isn't going to change his mind about.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess it won't be the old, like, the big gold belt, the world heavyweight title. I'm guessing SmackDown's getting its own custom championship.
Yeah, they might get their own championship. They might bring back the old WWE title that Brock Lesnar used to wear, and
I love that one. That's my favorite one. That's my
yeah,
favorite one.
they might bring that back. I don't know. Um, I mean, if Cena's going to be the SmackDown rep, maybe they'll bring back the spinner belt, right?
Oh, Jesus Christ. Even Cena, though, was like, get rid of it, so I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, he was like, get rid of it back in like 2011. And how long did it take for them to actually get rid of it?
They really dragged their heels.
Yeah.
It
So
should, honestly, it should have changed the moment he lost the belt the first time, but because it was just a gimmick, unique kind of title. I don't know. Look, I'm excited from that fan perspective because, again, like I used to remember when I was a kid, I'd be in front of the TV, I'd watch both the locker rooms, I'd be like, oh, who's going? We're having a nice bowl of chips. I'd just kick back like anybody watching an NFL draft. But, and I'm excited again. And I guess, like I always try and be, when you and I talk wrestling, a wait and see kind of guy. I don't like to condemn anything, and yet I don't like to give anything a positive appraisal straight away, even if I do have initially good feelings about it. So you and I will both be playing the wait and see game. All I know is that July 11th, because that is the date of the draft, if I'm not mistaken, uh, everything's just going to change. Everything's going to change. We'll see who goes where. I have a pretty good idea of where I could see certain talents ending up, but I'll stay mum about that for right now.
here's what I will ask too, John, because I wanted to bring this up, and
Okay.
I was kind of waiting for you to bring it up, and you never did, so I'll bring it up. What do you think they're going to do about divisions? Do you think we're going to have a cruiserweight division? Do you think that the women's division is going to be exclusive to one show or the other? Or do you think they're going to cut the women's roster in half and go from 12 showing up on a show to down to 6 on each show? Or, I don't know. That's kind of a big question because there's not anywhere close to as many women. I guess they could bring up some of the women in NXT. I guess Peyton Royce and Billie Kay, rather than jobbing to the stars in NXT, they'll be jobbing to the stars on Raw and SmackDown, which admittedly I would hate, but it would get them on Raw and SmackDown, right?
I'll break down your question one at a time, starting with the women, because that was like the last question you imparted me with. I do think it'll be 6 for 6, 6 on Raw, 6 on SmackDown.
Wow.
I do think the one champion, of course, will be defending the title against both. Both sets, I mean.
Yeah.
Cruiserweight division's interesting, right? Because we do have the Open this summer. And I'll answer your question this way. I think if the Open's a huge success on the network, they will bring back a cruiserweight division. I think it's all about how many people searched the Cruiserweight Open, how many people watched it, when it aired, like all that kind of shit. You know what I mean? And if they see positive feedback, I think it'll translate into, we can't lose this. Let's have a cruiserweight division. And honestly, maybe it'll be like the old days where the cruiserweight division would be specific to SmackDown, because Raw really would have the women's championship, I think, primarily. So SmackDown would need the Intercontinental title, and I think the Cruiserweight title would be that its own like division specific kind of championship. So yeah, I could see a return, but I think it's all really contingent on the success of the Cruiserweight Open this summer. So we'll see.
Yeah, and this also, I'm going to kind of bring this back. NXT is about to get rated, so obviously they're not going to just sign somebody and put them on television right away if they don't have television experience. So then who's going to take? I mean, it's probably safe to assume that Finn and Joe and American Alpha and Bailey and frickin' Nakamura, like all of those people, are probably going to be getting called up within the year.
I would agree.
So
Yeah,
who's left?
that's a good question. Who is left?
Hideo?
Hideo's. I actually read a rumor today. Hideo's rumored to be coming back in the next few weeks.
Yeah. La
So
Sombra, maybe? He just had a vignette last night.
yeah, he just had an incredible vignette. They're going to want to give him some time to breathe.
Gargano, Swan, Ciampa, some of the indie guys, you know?
Right. Yeah, NXT is going to get rated hard, guys. And that's going to be concerning because...
And it's weird to call it rated because they're getting promoted within the company.
Yeah, it's funny how we use promotion in the most technical sense. I mean, really, depending on how they get used. But
well, I mean, they'll be making more money. That's a promotion.
And that's what you and I know in conversation. We say that all the time. Like, I try and pay no mind to people that are like, "Oh, Tyler Breeze is doomed." Yeah, his bank account says otherwise. So we have to keep in mind these guys have livelihoods first and foremost. If they're secure, I'm happy, because that'd be what I'd be getting pissed about most, is if guys didn't get paid. Looking at you, TNA. So yeah, NXT I think is going to get hit hard in terms of, like, and again, I am curious, what is the ratio of we're bringing these guys in, but these guys are going out, gonna be like? Because if NXT can keep pace, I'll be honest, I wouldn't worry too much. But if we ever start to notice like a dearth in that locker room, even with a roster rotation, where I guess they would maybe try and mask it, it's going to be a bit more concerning to me.
It's so funny you bring up the roster rotation too, because that's out the frickin' window.
Oh yeah. Oh my God, yeah.
I mean, we were hoping that with the gigantic 100+ person roster on Raw, on the main roster, that they'd be able to pull off a roster rotation. Well, now you're going from 100+ down to 60+ on Raw, 40+ on SmackDown. Basically, you've got about 20 people per hour. And I mean, I feel like Lucha Underground shows usually average between like 7 to 8 and maybe like 15 max people per hour, and they have a super heavy roster rotation to the point that you'll see somebody and then you won't see them for another 2 or 3 weeks at least.
Right. Because then, yeah.
WWE, like, if the WWE ever even considered, which I doubt they did, but if they ever even considered trying to make a roster rotation work, the brand split kills that dream instantly.
Yeah, dude. Damn, man. Damn. Everything's going to change, especially if
it's going to hurt NXT's roster rotation too, because their roster is going to be thinner.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, NXT even, and not by choice when I say this, NXT is even going to be left with its own unique roster that's just going to be seeing like a lot more exposure.
Yeah.
And for people that are diehard NXT fans and loved the formula, like you and I were so big on the roster rotation. Like, we love that. That's gone now. Like you said, it's done. I'd love to know, because I know a prominent NXT fan that, does listen to us regularly, Lee Clark. I wonder what he would think about NXT having its own unique roster now, rotation just dying, as well as all of you guys, of course. Like, because to me it boggles the mind. Like, it hasn't even settled. Like, you say that, and I know it to be true. It's just hard to wrap my head around, because we've been so used to this roster rotation for so long now, and I think it's been so beneficial. What's going to happen to the quality of the product when it's just like a very unique roster specific to NXT, and no longer just a rotation? Because here's the thing, if we're being honest, and we would say this, we already feel like NXT had like periods of stagnation, like when competing with Lucha Underground and having this roster rotation, just everything with its own roster. Is it going to be of enough quality that it's going to be able to keep interest? Like, I worry about the NXT brand to a degree. Again, it really all comes down for me personally to the ratio of how many guys are we bringing in compared to how many are we bringing out. And really, when you bring the guys in, even that's kind of a moot point at first, because you've got to develop them. You've got to make sure they're TV ready. And so it's not just like, oh, we signed you here, go out and do stuff. I mean, with some talents it is, obviously, like Eric Young, Aries, and others, but not every talent's going to be that way. Just, yeah, very interesting time for NXT, and not necessarily good, but not, necessarily bad either, I guess.
Yeah. Now to kind of talk about the biggest bad news coming out of this.
Okay.
Well, what would you say has been the biggest issue facing the WWE over the course of the last 7 or 8 months, I'd say?
Injuries.
Those are going to be twice as devastating now, because now you're going from having 100 people And if you lose one, you're losing 1% of your roster. Now you're going down to 40 people. And if you lose someone, you're losing 2.5% of your roster.
Yeah, man. Holy shit. What do you think about that? Like, do you think there's any way around that?
I mean,
You
would think that the hope would be that the roster, the brand split would allow each individual to work fewer shows per week, decreasing the odds of an injury. However, on paper that sounds good, but that's not necessarily how life always works.
Right.
It's just, you're putting all of your eggs in one or two baskets, and if one of those baskets gets injured, it just so happens that you're screwed beyond belief.
Yeah, man. That's a lot of pressure too.
Yeah. Well, and you got to think too, we've already discussed Roman being the face of Raw, Cena being the face of SmackDown. That sounds cool because now you're not relying on one person to carry both shows. You're relying on one person on each show. But now if you think about it, each one of those guys has just as much responsibility as either one of them would have had before the brand split, because rather than one person carrying two shows and being able to say that he's the face of the company, you've got two guys now with that exact same responsibility that each have to claim to be the face of a brand. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So now, I mean, if Roman would have gotten hurt before, it would have hurt, but you still would have had Cena in there as a backup. But you're thinning out your roster to the point that your backups are looking less and less, their stars are looking less and less impressive. You know what I mean?
Exactly, yeah.
Like rather than the third most important guy on your roster being, say, Dean Ambrose, now the third most important guy on your roster is going to be Dolph Ziggler. Nobody wants that.
No, you're right. And that's another thing too. And I think you bring up an interesting point, invoking like Ziggler as like taking Dean Ambrose's spot under the old scheme. And we've always come back to this because you're like, you have an apathy. I wouldn't say an apathy, but you're just like, at certain points, it doesn't matter like who runs what because the writing's going to be the same. And the writing has been a point that we've hit consistently throughout this commentary.
Right.
The writing has to step up now because if you're divvying up the roster.
Well, no, it doesn't. I mean, you say that, but that's hyperbole. The writing can step up. The writing might want to step up, but they don't have to.
See, I disagree, though.
They should. They should, but I don't think that they need to. I think that if Raw and SmackDown would move forward at the exact same quality that they've been for the last 3 months, they wouldn't have a drop in viewership. If anything, the viewership would go up because of SmackDown going live.
And that may be true, but what I'm trying to get at is, and why I feel like they have to step up, you made the point for me. If you're going to a model now where Dolph Ziggler's your third biggest guy, that man's been handled. He's a fucking joke. Like, if you're going to have your top 5 guys on each brand, all 5 of those guys better matter. All 5 of those guys better be written in a way where we give a shit. Otherwise, I don't know what happens. Because in a situation like Dolph Ziggler being the third guy right now in this conversation would be a nightmare. Because he just doesn't have that credibility. I mean, could they fix that? Certainly they could fix that. I've always been an optimistic guy. If you're shitting on a talent today, he could be a champion tomorrow. It's all in the booking. What was my original philosophy since day one? You are what you're booked. I think that matters more than ever now to me because you're going to want a situation where not every single guy on each show matters, obviously, because you're going to have your hierarchies like everything else. But the guys that you want to be perceived as like, oh, these great performers, whatever, they better be booked like it, man. Like it better follow suit. I think it really becomes more important. And obviously, you're right. They should on any merit, old system, new system, whatever. You should want to put out the best possible product consistently. But now it's not even a matter of how they're feeling about it. I think it's just something that needs to be done for me. So that's kind of where I am with it.
I think that again, it's probably going to be hot at first. The first, I would say, month to 3 months worth of SmackDown live programming is going to be compelling. It's going to be good. It's going to be entertaining. It's going to be something that makes you want to keep watching. But the question really has to become, how long is Vince going to care about it? Because that's what it really all comes down to, because Vince McMahon is the one pulling all the strings here. Yeah, sure, he's probably going to have a separate writing team for Raw and SmackDown, and that's going to lighten the load for both teams, because now you're not going to have this big group of guys trying to write 5 hours worth of television every week. But then at the same time, Vince is going to have the responsibility and shoulder the responsibility of remembering storylines from one show to the next. And that's already been a problem for him without any real continuity from Raw to SmackDown, and only really needing to worry about Raw storylines and just kind of having SmackDown be a recap show. Now what's going to happen?
Right. And that's the thing. I think Vince being so protective of the brand and like, no, I've got to have my finger on everything. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, I think,
yeah,
it's going to be so detrimental now.
And now, again, like I said, he is going to be a lot more hands-on on SmackDown, and that's another big detrimental thing, is because how much influence is he going to have on commentary on SmackDown?
Oh my God, Mauro Ranallo. And I was getting ready to be excited too because I read something today, Ashton, that like even if we don't have unique brand pay-per-views, which I think I even read in that same article, like that's not happening the same way as just one world champion defending on both shows. Like that's not happening either. It's going to be two different world titles. The very best we would get is SmackDown announce team calls SmackDown matches, Raw team calls Raw matches. So they're not even going to do like a mashup of commentary, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It is going to be two separate teams doing respective matches, and I'm like, oh, that's so cool, Mauro Ranallo on pay-per-view. But if Vince is in his ear, you kind of lose that a little bit.
Yep.
And that really, really sucks. Dude, anything else that you personally want to discuss? Because I exhausted my personal topics that I wanted to bring to you.
Yeah, my big things were Vince is going to be more hands-on, two world champions, what's going to happen with the divisions, and that's about it. That's all the stuff that I really wanted to touch on, and of course the death of roster rotation hopes.
Yeah, it's going to be so interesting in the draft, like because there are still so many people injured. Like, where could a Bray Wyatt go? Or Randy Orton's been out forever, and he's going to be out during this draft.
I was just going to say, I'm guessing Bray will be back by then. I don't think Orton will be. He might be, but I don't think he will be. But Bray, I fully expect to be back by then.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting.
As a heel.
Yeah, well, oh, interesting. Okay,
no,
so you just...
Not interesting, actually quite boring and very, monotonous.
Well, no, just interesting that you have that opinion, because I didn't think that they would give up on the babyface experiment so quickly.
Oh, no, they're so desperate for heels that they're unwilling to turn Roman, but they'll bring back Bray as a heel, even though his last memory on Raw was being a face.
Exactly, and I mean, look what they did with Rollins, so I mean, there you go.
Well, at least the last memory we have of Rollins was as a heel.
Yeah, being a dick.
Meltzer himself said straight up, like, Bray is probably going to be brought back as a heel because they're so shallow on the heel side.
Damn, I was really ready for that babyface run.
Yeah.
I think we all were.
It says here, the heel side really only had Kevin Owens and to an extent Rusev and Jericho, so Rollins on the face side would make things more imbalanced. It's also the reason why the Wyatt family turn was the shot before injuries took Wyatt and Luke Harper out of play, is likely to be forgotten since they need Wyatt on the heel side.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's funny you mention a talent like Rusev, because, see, that is an instance where, I'll be honest, a brand split does kind of get me excited, because if hypothetically Rusev would go to SmackDown and win the SmackDown title, like I've been saying for a while now, I still think after all this time he's still criminally underrated. Maybe he'd get to shine more there. I don't know. It's just going to be a very, very interesting scenario. Where is everybody going to end up?
We're going to have a lot of heel turns over the course of the next 3 months or so, because like I just said, like Meltzer said, the heel roster is incredibly shallow. And we've been talking about this on Raw, TWitWoW, for weeks now, so it's not even like you can try and make the claim that I'm only saying it because Meltzer said it, because you and I have been saying it for weeks, if not months at this point.
Yeah.
There just aren't enough top heels, and that Roman turning could be the shot in the arm that the heel roster needs, but Roman can't turn because Vince is what it comes down to, because Vince.
Right. Oh, man. Well, guys, I mean, that's it. I'm really excited, though. I will say what I am really excited for, the mock draft video that we are going to be doing, you and I. That's going to be a lot of fun. Who's going to end up where? And then for the actual draft, I mean, that's going to be... And didn't you and I actually agree we'd be doing live reactions for the draft episode of Raw?
That is correct. We are going to be doing live reactions for the draft lottery special episode of Raw on July 11th, so you guys have that to look forward to. And I'm guessing we're also probably going to do live reactions to the first live SmackDown, whenever that happens to be.
Right, so that's going to be a lot of fun, guys. We get to react to each pick. you'll get our immediate thoughts, at least as far as live reactions goes. Was it a good move? Was it a bad move? So some very interesting content, in the wake of this news coming through the pipeline. I can't wait for it. We've had a nice little discussion here. I can't think of anything else to ask or say. So the floor is yours, brother. If there's any last minute things you want to say, I think we're good.
No, I'm gonna close it out, man. This was a great discussion. I'm really glad that we got to kind of dive in there with the scalpel and really kind of clear everything out of there that might have been showing up. Kind of got everything on the table. That being said, guys, we don't have any kind of plans over the weekend, I don't believe. So we will see you all on Monday for Raw TWitWoW. Until then, let's hope this doesn't become a disaster.